Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adopted mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Welcome back, families, to the Called to Love podcast. Today, we are talking about unexpected seasons in life that leave us saying, this is not what I signed up for. And for foster and adoptive parents, I can almost guarantee that each one of us walking this journey have made this statement at some point. And so joining me to share her own story and a word of encouragement for those who find themselves in a season that they did not expect is author, counselor, and Bible teacher Nicole Eunice. Nicole, welcome. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm really excited to learn from you today. And as we were sharing before we got started on our recording, I think this message of your book is so fitting for our listeners. We are all coming to you at different points in our story, at different points in our struggles, as we say yes to this calling, as we hesitate to say yes to this calling, whether it be foster care or adoption. And I know that you have some of this in your own life story, growing up with adoption, and even in your own adult life, where you were on a path towards adoption, and then God took you down a completely different road. And I think that is going to minister to our listeners today. So can we begin just by having you share a little bit of those stories with us?
Absolutely. I'm so glad to do that. Thanks for having me here. This is it's always interesting to be a person who, at least on the outside, appears to have a biological family only, and that's just the way, our life has been, when in reality there's been a lot more backstory than that, which of course is very, very true for people who go through foster and adoption as part of their calling. So I grew up in an adoptive family. So my youngest brother, Stevie, was adopted from Korea in 1982. He was born in 1982, adopted in 1984. And so I've always, even sort of quote unquote before adoption was very like mainstream in the Christian world, much more talked about, much more spotlighted. We were an adoptive family. And as you can imagine, in the 1980s, there was not a whole lot of like cross-cultural assimilation or wraparound support, or even as much really known about many of the issues that adoptive families may find themselves facing when it comes to adopting a child, especially particularly out of, the circumstances that were the circumstances surrounding my brother's adoption. So grew up with that as, a sibling in a family system that was part of this adoptive world. And, I will say, which I've often shared in hopefully confidence and encouragement to my friends who are adoptive families now, I never once, and to this day, have ever thought of my brother Steve as anything but my brother. There's just never been ever a time where that wasn't true. But adoptive families face, some particular and unique challenges, and we certainly did. So that has always given me a real tender heart toward adoption and the call to adopt. In addition to that, we have our own story, my husband and I, of our sort of call by God to adoption, and what that looked like in our story back in really when our youngest was about 5 years old. So it's a good 10 years ago now, but we were pursuing the same thing. My husband particularly, actually more than I did, which I share that because, usually there's one person who's the champion first. And, it wasn't me, because I had all the bumps and bruises and reality of the role, often particularly if there's a primary caregiver. And as the mom, that was my role, and really was like, I'm not sure I can do this, and really was being obedient alongside of Dave, who felt probably a little bit stronger about it than I did. And we trusted God to work that out, whatever that was going to be. And the story has many twists and turns, but the most important part of the story is that in a very unexpected way, we kind of were like pushed out of the adoption like agency we were in, which I'm a real achiever. So the idea that I would have a homework assignment turned back in and told that it wasn't done correctly is very strange. And
Right.
in that phase of time between, we had already had a home study, we were already approved in an agency, we were moving forward. And in that time, we had a family friend that we had known since her teenage years who actually ended up pregnant as a single mom and lived with us half to three quarters of time for the whole first 5 years of her daughter's life as she was a teenage mom. So God
Wow.
had an incredible plan, and it's not a plan that you can check a box. It's not like I can say, oh, I'm an adoptive mom or I'm a foster mom or whatever. It's just God's way of bringing, callings into our life for a season. And they are a dear family. I just did her wedding last summer. Um, and they're expecting their second. So it's a pretty
Wow.
exciting way to be a part of a long story where, I was a part of this friend's life when she was 19. And then, when she's 29, I'm getting to, meet her husband and do their wedding and be in their life. So it's been very, very cool.
Wow, I love that. And, it just makes me think about expectations for those who
Mm-hmm.
initially sense that calling from the Lord and they get this picture in their mind of what it's going to look like and how it's going to come to fruition. And the Lord's like, actually, I'm the one driving this whole thing, and I'm the one who knows the plan on the other side of it. And so, what does that look like for you, Nicole, personally, as you
Mm-hmm.
lived in an adoptive home and then as you walked this very unexpected result of what God called you to say yes to? What has that taught you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great question, Summer. Thank you. I think this happens to a lot of us. Uh, you know, one of the things that I end up, in my ministry life, I preach and teach and write books, particularly have many, many conversations with men and women, but particularly women. And one of the things I've seen first as a therapist, then as a pastor, is this real disappointment when we feel like God has placed dreams on our heart and then they don't come to fruition the way we expect. And I really
Yeah,
like to start conversations about dreams to separate desires and plans because I think we often believe that our plans equal our desires. So if I have a desire, for
yeah,
instance, to give love, and I think that means I'm going to be married, well, the desire is to be in a belonging and a commitment and to give and receive love. The plan is to get married. Those are not the same thing. And I think God gives us real desires, right, in our heart. But He really wants to be the master planner of what that plan is. And sometimes I think we get hurt by our plan not happening and we think we're not supposed to have desires. And what I
yeah,
love to try to help us understand is that we can have holy desires and God's way of seeing those out. Probably they're not going to specifically or exactly align to our plans. And if we could separate those
yeah,
two, that's really, I think, maturity in the Lord. And I'm
yeah,
sure if you're an adoptive parent or foster parent on this podcast listening right now, I'm sure you're nodding along of like, yeah, I thought these things. And we can carry a lot of hurt and a lot of grief in that. But no one ever said that life wasn't going to have hurt or grief in it. And like, that is a part of our experience in this world.
yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, we don't realize or we underestimate the influence of what culture and society says our dreams should look like. And so that's definitely a factor when it comes to walking out this calling and obedience is what the American dream says that we are supposed to have, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have our careers, we're supposed to have 2.5 kids, whatever zero point 0.5 of a kid is, and a house with a white picket fence and this perfectly curated life that we see on social media. And we know, like you're saying, when you're called down the pathway of foster care and adoption, or just to open your heart to love
Mm-hmm.
someone in a way that the Lord calls us to do, it's going to look far from that. And it's going to be something that most people around us are not going to understand. And that is going to create challenges
Yeah.
and really even cause us to second guess putting that yes on the table. So, how
Mm-hmm.
would you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is true for any area of our life that requires perseverance. And for me, one of the things I've often said, and this is the Nicole Living Translation. This is not from Scripture. But what I've seen as a pattern, not all the time, but sometimes, is that the more clear God makes a call, the harder the call usually ends up being. So what I always
Yeah.
say to people is like, hey, if you're in a place where you're thinking you need to pivot or you want to give up or you're really discouraged, I'm always like, look backward to where you started walking out this walk. Like, what's the last thing that God said to you, or the last thing that you felt was really confirmed by God? And by the way, confirmed by God
Yes.
does not mean he spoke to you and wrote in the sky. And like for some people, he definitely does speak like that. But for a lot of people, it's a process where they feel obedient, they feel peace. It was confirmed
Yeah.
externally, it was confirmed internally. The circumstances came together. That can be your story too. And
Yeah.
I think when we're discouraged, we need to look back and say, okay, when did I say yes to God? What was the thing I said yes to? And has he changed the plan? And if he hasn't
Mhm.
changed the plan, then that means that this is a season of discouragement. It's not like a season for me to give up or to
That's
believe I
good.
did something wrong. And that's the other huge thing I've learned from listening to women is, and from my own story, to be honest with you, is like when things get hard, we tend to ask ourselves, let me reverse engineer where I went wrong and how I could have avoided
Yes.
the pain that I'm in right now. And that's really like a pretty
Yes.
false belief, because the belief is I could be perfect in every way and that would make all trouble go away. And
Yeah.
Jesus had a lot of trouble. So, and he was perfect in every way, which is somehow
Right.
very, very comforting to me. I'm like, his disciples were
I
such a
agree.
mess and he was like the best leader of all time and it didn't matter. So, that's usually my encouragement about perseverance.
Oh, that's really, really good. And we do. We have to cling to that. And I've talked about that on the show before. And we're just calling it Ebenezer moments where we have to go back because there's so much resistance that we experience when we step forward in these callings, especially ones that are God ordained. The enemy wants to interfere at every turn and he wants to discourage us and get in our heads. And I love the way that you explain that and how we as women, I mean, it is that sense of control. We're like, if I had only done something different, then things
Hmm.
wouldn't be fill in the blank. And that is
Hmm.
such a trap from the enemy. And there's so much bondage associated with that. And so we need as much freedom as possible to walk in obedience to our calling. We have got to be able to slough that off and to identify it. So I love that you call that out, Nicole. I think that's so, so important.
Hmm.
And I know in the book, you walk through the story of Joseph found in the book of Genesis. And this is
Yep.
certainly a perfect example of God having a really big plan for Joseph's life, but he walked through a lot of unexplainable, hard things and certainly experienced uncertainty. And so, based on your study of this
Hmm.
particular story, how can this be an encouragement for our families that are walking in this particular calling, whether it be foster care or adoption?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much. There's so much there. This is just one of my favorite stories in the Bible, and I've loved the chance to write about it and really dig in. There's some really incredible details, even if you've read the story before, that I think we have an opportunity to see in a new way, especially when we enter into the story with the belief that God has a lot to teach us. He invites us to identify with stories. He doesn't give us stories in the Bible so that we can feel less than or like, oh, like that's a
Mm,
special person and I'm not a special person. I think he really gives us
right.
stories to say, hey, this is this is a true story, a historical figure in a historical time to a certain people. But the other way that we know what I believe really to be true about scripture is it is what it says it is, which is God breathed and useful for
Right.
teaching and correction. And so if God has breathed life into the story, I think the life he's breathing into it is inviting us to actually engage it for what it means for
Yes.
us. And a lot of times people do read if you know anything about the Joseph story, it's like, well, he had this big dream and then this big dream came true. But the reality is there's like 30 years in between those two things happening. And by the way, the big dream coming true is nothing that he could have ever expected, nor really do I think he would have desired. It's not like
Yeah.
I saw my name in lights and then 40 years later, like, look at me, I'm getting a Grammy. Like it's not that story at all.
Right.
It's so different than that. But the story is about a dream and then trusting God in the time between and how that dream developed, like what happened that brought that dream about. And I do think that when we're called to adoption and to foster, we are responding to a dream. We're
Yeah.
responding to a deep, because it's just not something that it's you're making a lifetime commitment, so you're not entering into it lightly. You're entering into it
Right.
because you do have a dream. And the story of Joseph gives us these incredible opportunities to really examine, and this is, rigorous faith. What does it mean that God tests us? Like, why would God do that? What is in a test? What does it really look like to trust God in times of waiting and trust the opportunities in front of you and trust the day ahead? And then,
Yeah.
like, how do we actually define triumph? How do we define redemption? Because a lot of times I don't think it's quite maybe the way we would plan. It just might not be what we plan, but it doesn't mean that God's
Right.
not good and God's not in it.
Hey, sweet friend, do you have questions about adoption and foster care? This podcast is meant to be a resource for you to help you in this calling, which can be full of so many unknowns. We want to answer your questions, which is why in the show notes you'll find Summer's email, which is summercolbert@gmail.com, where you can submit your questions to Summer and let us know if we can share your questions or story here on the podcast, so other listeners can know that they aren't alone in their wondering and experiences. Again, that email is SOMERCOLBERT@gmail.com, or use the link below. You are not alone in this journey, sweet friend. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And his story is so fitting as we walk through all of the different highs
Mhm.
and lows, because you're right. We see that dream in lights and we picture what this is going to look like. And we picture embracing a child that we give our hearts to. And we picture this beautiful redemptive story, and we don't picture the hard. And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, had I known what I was going to walk through in 10 years of adoption journeys and the realities of trauma behavior and the brokenness that adoption
Mhm.
represents, I don't know that I would have been brave enough to say yes. So it's actually a blessing that the Lord doesn't tell us everything
Right.
when he first calls, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, and I think that's true for all of us. And I think I would have punked out a long time ago and just said, nope, that's too hard. That's too scary. And I hear that from my families. You talk about
Mhm.
listening to women. I sit down with families on a weekly basis, Nicole, and I'm hearing the fear, the anxiety, the doubt, the questioning, the anticipation, hearing all the worst case scenarios come to mind that are all valid. And I
Mhm.
hear that. But if God calls, that's where we have a choice to make and whether we're going to be obedient or not.
Mhm.
But we do sometimes find ourselves in these situations. And then this is, again, true for my own story, and our listeners know this. Like, I went into it with this Hallmark mindset, and I was well into it before the realities came crashing in on me. And so it was very disorienting for me to realize, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for,
Mhm.
just, I
Mhm.
mean, to perfectly apply your message. And so, what advice do you have for people who, like myself several years back, or those who might find themselves in that situation right now where it's like, I just need to get my bearings as I struggle through this? And what does it look like to struggle well as you get your bearings and you try to understand where God has you in the difficult, in the challenging, and in the uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, thank you, Summer, for sharing that. And I just, I do want to share, because maybe it doesn't feel like I haven't had that many opportunities where, like, I'm a grown up who's had a whole life and also had an adoptive, like, I can speak from that place of being a sibling. And I really believe that, as difficult as in many ways as an adoption journey can be, you are, like, substantively changing if you have biological children, you are changing their viewpoint on the world, you are changing your
Yeah,
community. And I know, like, a lot of us don't, like, we might really say to the Lord, I didn't sign up for that. I'm not trying to be a trailblazer. I'm not trying to be everyone's example. I'm not, whatever. And I get that. I mean, I've had a lot of that in my life, but I do want to give you encouragement that what feels really hard right now might be the very best thing to ever have happen to your family system, to your marriage, to your faith, to your children. And it's not on you to figure all that out, but to hold on to hope that even in the
yeah,
darkest time, God is doing something. And I know it's scary. I mean, a lot of people would prefer, I mean, who wouldn't? Let's be honest. All of us would prefer a
yeah,
comfortable faith. We would love for, like, just
absolutely.
like it just be comfortable and just work out. And then we get into situations where pain comes to us, or like a thing that we set out to do becomes so challenging, and it makes us question what we believe about God. And that's a lot of
Right.
what would invite someone trying to find their bearings to, is to say,
Yeah.
it is okay to be honest with yourself about what you're really feeling and what you're really
Yeah.
thinking and what you're really questioning, because God is big enough for that. The only
Right.
thing that's really going to hold you back is if you pretend like you're not asking those questions and you try to fake it
Mm.
or escape or somehow blame some other factor, start looking inward as the blame is on you or on your family or in your marriage or in your church community or whatever. And I've seen that a lot, and it's actually pretty toxic. If you can't
Yeah.
face like your own story and be like, okay, what am I really feeling and thinking, and how might God be bringing me to acceptance in this life, you will bring negative energy to like everything else that you do.
Yeah.
And I say that because I'm trying to say with love and care and compassion, like, oh man, I know this is hard. And also I believe in you. And that means like there is this facing of your own story that becomes a part of the journey.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree with that. And that ties beautifully into, something else you talk about in the book. And that's just the fact that God uses hard times and
Mhm,
twists and turns in our story.
mhm,
And you call them in between spaces to
mhm,
grow us, because you're right. A safe faith isn't going to grow us. I mean, we do grow in the difficult times. And for those of us that are walking specifically this adoption and foster journey, I mean, it does. It stretches you in ways that you would have never expected. It brings out
mhm.
ugly in your flesh that you would have never expected. It
Yeah.
brings out a resentment of dependence on you, honestly, as the caregiver, or, dealing with attachment issues or whatever it might look like, and so it's one thing to say it, but it's quite another thing to live it.
Yeah.
And so that's where, really rubber meets the road. And it's like, okay, let's dive into this. Let's really dig into what we're examining, what we're considering, what we're thinking about God, and how we are trying to reconcile all of this wrestling as we go through it. And so you talked about really leaning into understanding God's character as we're
Mhm,
walking through that
mhm,
wrestling. And so, what does that look like as we're walking through these seasons that we didn't sign up for?
mhm. Yeah. Yes, I think I really appreciate you sharing, some of that. I think when I talk about testing, and we see tests of Joseph's character over and over again. And, what I like to say about testing is that testing is just revealing what's already there. It's not
Mm,
like it's not like something you're going to pass and fail because you prepared for it. It's going to be God, is
right.
God who knows all, is determining in his fierce mercy to reveal to you what is already there. That's what tests do.
Yeah.
And so when we see the ugly parts of ourselves, when we are questioning, when we're doubting, when we like, that is, there. It was there. It just might have had like a little bit of a, it might have been wrapped up in some bubble tape or whatever. And now that's come off, and you're
Yeah.
seeing what's there. And this is where we learn about the character of God. I
Yeah.
really think that as hard as it is, like the times that I've experienced God's care, God's love, his direction, the most in my life has been always at my most desperate times.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll be the first to admit, I am really good at trying to handle my own stuff. I'm really good at making like a plan A, B, C, D, double G. Like I'm into some planning. And
Same.
I kind of feel like God's like, okay, girl, run the course. Like, go ahead, try all your things until you're finally like
Yep.
tired enough and desperate enough to actually want to hear from me and to give up
Yeah.
your own ideas for a second. So I can't, I speak a little bit deeper theologically about some of what's going on in this idea. How can God be all powerful and all good? And, I hope and pray that that will be very encouraging to you if you guys are looking to do a study or, read the book together. But for the purposes of our time today, I just want to share with you personally my experience with God, which is,
Yeah.
man, he does his best work, or I should say, I do my best listening when I'm in a pretty desperate place, and I find myself there
Yeah.
actually more and more frequently as I get older, not less. And I think that's by design. I think that's how God would have it.
Most definitely. And we've definitely touched on that, just different points of conversation, that ultimately it's not about the circumstances, it's about relationship and how the Lord is trying to grow us as individuals,
Mhm.
and understanding that He is sovereign over every story that is represented in our families, whether it comes from kids coming from broken places into our homes, and completing our family in a beautiful and really messy way, or whatever that looks like. He is working on us individually. And so I love that you talk about that. He does his best work when we let go.
Yeah.
And that is so, so hard to do. And I do, that has been an ongoing struggle for me personally, and something that I do as I'm getting older. I'm resigning more and more and realizing that it's not just a, oh, and I'm begrudgingly giving that to God, but
Mhm.
I'm welcoming it more and more because I'm understanding his goodness in that surrender. And so, whatever that means to you today, listener, I hope that's an encouragement to you of just that the blessing and the surrender. Those can be pretty churchy words that can get
Mhm.
caught up, but really lean into that of there is so much blessing in that. And I think about this story as we're kind of talking through and coming close to wrapping up our conversation today, Nicole. We have the benefit in reading the story from start to finish in the book of Genesis. So we know
Mhm.
how it starts for Joseph and we know how it ends. But for our families that are walking in the day in and day out and sometimes surviving moment by moment in really hard things, they don't have the benefit of that 30,000-foot view or understanding what's on the other side of their story. And so you talked a little bit ago about perseverance, but what advice would you lean into a little bit more for our listeners who are like, I don't know what tonight's going to look like. I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like.
Mhm.
I don't know what next week is going to look like. I don't know how this story is going to end. How would you encourage them?
Well, I would remind, I think Joseph didn't either. So, like, as we walk through it, there is like, oh, cool. Like, if we really engage this and we think about these year in and year out and kind of some of the choices that he made and some of the opportunities that he had and some of the injustices that he faced, it is
Yeah.
just so human. I mean, there's just a lot. Actually, there's a lot to wrestle with because you're like, oh, wait, like, actually, this was really hard and really bad. And does that mean that my life's going to
Yeah.
be really hard and really bad? And it might be, I don't think that God's design for our life is evil intended, that we're going to like have this horrible life. But I also think we have to be honest about what does a good life mean? Like, if we're following God, what does a good life mean? And
Right.
what I do know to be true is that God promises his presence. He promises his comfort. He promises his peace. He promises us daily bread. He doesn't promise tomorrow bread, and he makes that pretty clear. So
Yeah.
there is this sort of daily, vibrant, enough for today, the strength for today, the trust for today that God makes really clear that he promises. He promises that our tears matter. He promises that our sin does not separate us from him when we are in Christ. He
Right.
promises that we are being made new. Like, there's a lot to work with, actually. Like, if you're in a really hard place, God gives us a lot to work with and a lot that we can ask for and that we can ask for in confidence and in faith. God promises that we can approach his throne and receive help in our time of need. And I hope as you're listening, if you're in a hard place, that you don't give up on what God's offering today. And that if this has been encouraging to you, like, that is God's provision for today. Like, he sees you and people will come up to me after I preach and they're like, oh, like, that whole message was for me. And I'm like, well, that's how much God loves you because I don't know
Yeah.
you. It's not about me. Like, if you felt that
Right.
way, I want you to receive that as from the Lord. Like, he sees you and he hears you. And if
Yeah.
you're getting tearful as you listen to this, like, that's the Lord. Like, it's not Summer, it's not me. It's the
That's
Spirit of
right.
God in you, speaking to you and comforting you and loving you and reminding you that you have not been forgotten and that God's not surprised by where you are and he's not upset and he's not ashamed. He's actually like just giving his like fatherly delight, his parental approval over you. And so a lot of what happens in an unexpected season is I think our expectations shift and our understanding of what a good life is shift as well when we move to acceptance. And a lot of acceptance does mean grieving the dream as we thought it would play out
Right.
and feeling that loss and allowing space to let that loss be a part of your story, but not let that loss define your story. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's really the rigorous journey, particularly for foster and adoptive parents.
Yes, most definitely. And I'm thinking through that. I mean, we need all of the space that we can get and all of the energy that we can get because there is so much heart work that goes into
Hmm.
this particular calling. There's so much pouring out that
Hmm.
goes into this particular calling. And so the energy that we have is precious and the way that we steward it is crucial to understand as we're walking through this. And as you're talking about perseverance, as you were sharing, and I appreciate so much the way that you laid that out for us, I just kept hearing Jeremiah 29:11, plans to give you a hope and a future. And he knows what that is. And so if you're resting in that, then you can just sit and receive today, knowing that he has the hope in the future and that leaning into him is going to be the ultimate security so that you can operate from this place of overflow for your kids who are needing you in that moment. And that no season lasts forever. And you talk about the story of Joseph, and there were so many ups and downs and highs and lows, but he didn't stay in one place.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there was good. Yes, there was bad. And there was everything kind of in between, but he never stayed in one place. And I think sometimes we struggle to persevere when we feel like we're never going to move forward in any way. And so, yeah, hanging on to what's today and the abundance that God has for you today, I think is such an important point, Nicole. And I really appreciate you sharing that. That is something that blesses me even in this moment as we're having this conversation. So listeners, I pray that blesses you. Hang on to the abundance that God has for you today and understand that there is a hope and a future on the other side of it. Nicole, I'm so grateful for this message and just this conversation today. I want to ask you one more question as we close out our conversation, a very personal one, and please feel free to answer this however you feel led. But what has been your biggest lesson in walking through seasons that you yourself didn't sign up for?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for asking that, Summer. For sure, my biggest lesson is the same lesson that I hear. When I set out to write this book, I always think about you, like you listener right now. When I write something, I'm just like, is this going to be helpful? Is this something that even if you're in a really hard season, you're going to take comfort? You're not going to feel shamed. You're not going to feel like, oh, this is one more thing to add to my to-do list, but that I could be your friend at your quiet time or before you go to bed or over your cup of tea, where you really like look forward to reading because you know that you're going to feel seen and comforted. That's really the heart of this book, is to say like, can I walk with you in this season through these words? Not because you need to like get your life together, which honestly is often the case. Like nonfiction books, you sometimes leave with sort of this vague feeling of like, I guess I'm not doing it right. I guess I have like 18,000 more things to add to my to-do list about how to be a great mom. And like, nobody wants that. It's just not.
No.
So the desire is that it would be like a place of comfort and solace and, journey as you're in the journey. Because what I've learned over my own unexpected seasons is that God is far more gentle with us than we are with ourselves. And
So true.
his love is so exceedingly abundant beyond the love or patience that we have for ourselves. And I do think we're all on a journey to love and a journey to be loved. And as we experience the God's nature of loving us, we actually can love more easily, which really is the call, right, to the adoptive and foster parent, is what does it look like for me to love without condition and to love in a really sometimes very painful situation? And how do I do that and not like forfeit my soul? How do I do that and also like continue to have joy and not just expend myself beyond, an ability or to expend myself, maybe let's say out of my own strength, not out of like a place of abundance. And what I've learned in my own lessons, in my own seasons, is that God is on a journey to love me and for me to accept it. And that makes me a little tearful, because I'm like, at the end of the day, guys, that's what we're doing. Like, we're here for a blink of an eye. Like it's just not that long. And you have a spiritual parent who loves you and sees you for you and knows what you're going through and wants to give you what you need. And so a lot of that journey is believing that you don't need to perform for God, and he's not waiting for you to save someone or something in your family, but that you can like get filled up and that you can receive from him, specifically you, and trust him with the rest. And that's what I've always learned. And every time this season comes back around that I'm learning the lesson again, I'm learning how to receive that love again and again.
That's so, so good, Nicole. I love that. Listeners, the book is called Not What I Signed Up For: Finding the Strength, Purpose, and Faith to Get Through a Season You Didn't Expect. And if you have been blessed by Nicole's message today, and if you would like to get a copy of the book, I want to make sure that you can connect with her on social media and get a copy of the book. Nicole, where's the best place they can do that?
Well, my name's easy. It's easy to find me. So Nicole Eunice, Unice. If you guys come over to Instagram, you'll find everything you need, or you can jump over to my website and I send out some email encouragement. If you want to jump on that email list, love to be your email friend.
Love that. Okay. I will have those links in today's show
Oh,
notes,
and the
friends.
book's everywhere. I forgot to say that.
You're
The
good.
book's everywhere. You guys, you can get the book anywhere. The Bible study is out as well. It's a 6-week Bible study with a video series on Right Now Media. So really easy to do with the group, or maybe if you've got an online group, especially of foster or adoptive moms, this could be a really life-giving way for you guys to connect. And even those of your friends who maybe aren't as walking so closely in their faith, I think there's a lot here. That's what someone shared with me yesterday in a book talk, was like, there's a lot here, even if you're not necessarily sure if you want to like jump all the way in with God. There's a lot to be learned in this. So would love for you to check any of those places out.
Fantastic. Okay, friends, I'm going to have those links in today's show notes. And I love your suggestion, Nicole. If you meet with a support group, maybe within your church or your community, this would be a great opportunity for community, walking the same, life story right now, a similar journey, and you can support one another and be firmly rooted in God's word as you do that. So, Nicole, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your message. It has been such a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.